Yeah, I think from Mike's perspective, the distance initially wasn't an issue. I think it's one of those, he feels that it's one of those friendships that's strong enough that you can go a year, a couple years without necessarily talking to each other, then still reunite and have everything be the same. But then the revelation that comes out, like specifically discovering it like through third-hand information through the internet about him, like finding out this really personal information. I think that on top of the distance and not being with him for so long just really stings enough to get Cass discussing feelings.
Yeah, and I feel like the distance weighs differently for Morgan, simply because he's in like a completely different world, like one that he's not used to. So I feel like there's the whole paranoia of like who he left back home, and having the relationship with Des, having his friendship with Cass. Like he feels like maybe it's like dwindling away and whatnot. So like when he does get back, it's like, I don't know, kind of like trying to play catch up, and which is interesting, or at least my view.
Yeah, acting opposite each other, I thought it was great. Thank you. Yeah, I found kind of the best thing that you can do is just constantly be with the other person, then just like watch their eyes, and you have really nice eyes.
Ah,
There
stop
you go.
this.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Yeah. No, but it was like also I found like you have a very similar demeanor to one of my classmates that I went to acting school with,
Oh,
and so
sweet.
yeah, so just right off the top going through the scene in my mind, I was just like, oh, just like I'm acting opposite Dan again.
Yeah.
This is cool. So kind of dropping into that and then just
Yeah.
kind of endowing you with the presence of someone else who I know, who I like have a relationship with, and then just like painting that picture in my mind was a big thing, just to like jump right into, oh, instant friendship.
Yeah, and what's cool too, like the best thing I like with working with actors on set that we have to build the chemistry like right away is the fact that like those who are willing to play, who like aren't really stuck in their head like I'm just gonna. There's some of those actors who are just like, I'm just gonna do my own thing, my own process, and I get that way sometimes. But like you were just like down to try new things every single time, and I feel like that keeps me on my toes where I actually have to listen to you. Right. I can't pre-plan anything. I'm like, what are you gonna throw at me now? I'm gonna listen to you. I'm gonna look at you, make sure that I know like what's going on. So it keeps me grounded, and yeah. So thanks, pal.
My pleasure. Thank you. There's a lot about Mike Cassio I find really interesting. Something I find interesting across the board with this project and this series is taking the characters from Othello and sort of planting the same people, the same spirit in a modern setting and seeing kind of what our contemporary world does to them. And so seeing sort of what Michael Cassio would be like now in 2015. And that was a really good in. So what I loved was sort of marrying that person with mannerisms, stereotypes, if you will, like an archetype for modern times, as it were. So that's what I find really interesting. I also really like how much less of a thinker he is than me. That's the main thing. It's really nice to just stop thinking and just start doing, and I feel like that's such a driving force with Mike. I think he's really driven and really passionate, and so he acts before he thinks. And that's one of the fantastic things I enjoyed about doing the scene. Like you were saying, just constantly throwing stuff out and seeing what happens and then reacting to it. Cassio gave me a lot of new stuff to do. Typically, I'm cast either as someone much older than myself when I'm on stage, or someone who's very heady, or an elephant. I've played elephants a lot of times. And so it was very interesting to, like I was saying, play someone who is very close to myself in age, but then also playing someone who's very different from myself in all other respects, essentially. And then trying to find the truth of the character while still sort of playing the bro, as it were. So initially when I was just rehearsing and practicing on my own, I went through the phase where I was sort of, like I said, playing a stereotype, and then I had to think to myself, okay, how do I use these elements and then kind of find what his truth is within that, instead of just, putting on kicking it into Brover Drive, as it were.